Welcome back to week 12 of One Man Selection Committee. We had an interesting week last weekend with two undefeated teams going down. It's going to leave one one-loss team in the top 4. If you haven't seen this video series before, I basically ranked the top 12 resumes in college football. I treat it as if the playoffs started today. I rank the teams based on how well they can prove they can beat good teams, as well as factoring in losses. For me, I don't put too much influence on margin of victory. Now, obviously, there's going to be a huge difference between winning by 1 and winning by 17, but in my mind, it's not as important as others might make it. So let's get started with the rankings. At number 12, I have the Utah Utes. Utah is a great team, and they have dominated in every win this season, but they took a bad loss to USC. And now, USC is moving up in the computer rankings. They are ranked, I believe, 21st in the TeamRankings.com rankings, but it still isn't a great loss for Utah. Utah is yet to prove that they can beat a team better than 17th ranked Washington. The teams that are ahead of Utah have either better losses or they have proven that they can beat good teams. This will all shake out for Utah if they can beat Oregon, as it will give them a top 10 win and move them into the playoff conversation. Next up, at number 11, we have Michigan. And this is one of my controversial teams in my top 12. But by looking at their resume, it actually isn't bad, considering they took a blowout loss at Wisconsin. Michigan blew out 14th ranked Notre Dame, as well as knocking off 15th ranked Iowa. The blowout win over Notre Dame helps ease the punishment of the blowout loss to Wisconsin. If you compare Utah and Michigan, Michigan has beaten two teams that are better than the best team Utah has played. And I'd say getting blown out by a good team in Wisconsin is similar to Utah's loss to USC. So if we get rid of the USC and Wisconsin games for the respective teams, Michigan's resume is the clear favorite. The only thing stopping the Wolverines from climbing any higher is the fact that they were down 35-0 against Wisconsin. Alright, next up we have number 10, the Oregon Ducks. The biggest weakness with Oregon's resume is the fact that they simply do not have good wins under their belt. The best team Oregon beat was Washington, and the Ducks' best performance was the blowout win over USC. Right now, Oregon would get the edge over Utah simply because Utah has a worse loss. Oregon beat USC in LA while Utah did not. These two teams actually have quite a few common opponents in the top 30. Oregon has performed better against these common opponents than Utah has. Now, the reason Oregon is ahead of Michigan is because Oregon did not get blown out by Auburn and Michigan got blown out by Wisconsin. I would consider Auburn and Wisconsin to be similar, teams in caliber. Oregon was competitive in that game, and Michigan was just not competitive against Wisconsin. It's only fair to put Oregon over Michigan, but Oregon down the run is going to need a quality win over Utah to be able to jump into the playoff conversation, and right now they just don't have a quality win. At number 9, we have Alabama, just like last week. Alabama has yet to have a quality win. They lost to a good team in LSU, but Alabama has only proven that they can beat Texas A&M. And I'm not going to punish Alabama at all for losing to Tua Tagovailoa for the season. I think it's unfair to do so. I don't care if Alabama loses their entire defense after the Auburn game. If Alabama or any team has a good enough resume, it shouldn't matter what we think will happen in the playoff game. They deserve to get in. Now, shifting gears a little bit, let's talk about why Alabama is ahead of Oregon. It's actually fairly simple. Alabama dominated Texas A&M on the road, and the best team Oregon played was Washington, and the Ducks barely slipped out alive. Not only that, but Alabama has lost to a better team than Oregon did. So that breaks the tie between Oregon and Alabama. It's going to be a very tight race between Oregon and Alabama if Alabama beats Auburn and Oregon beats Utah. Both these teams are going to have a very similar best win. In my mind, and I know we're still good ways out, Alabama could get the edge. I'm not biased or anything, but... Now, at number 8, and this is my second controversial pick, but I have Auburn. And the reason Auburn is ahead of Alabama is because Auburn has beaten a top 10 team in Oregon, which is a better win than Alabama's best win. Not only that, but Auburn has lost to teams that are better than the best win Alabama has had. The only thing holding Auburn in the top 8 is the Oregon win in the first game. If they didn't play Oregon, then they would be way lower because they wouldn't have had a top 10 win. I know this is going to be controversial, but it makes sense if you're going by my philosophy, which is to rank teams based on how well they prove they can beat good teams. At the 7th spot, we have Florida. And part of the reason Florida is at 7 is because of the win they have over Auburn. That has always been big for me to honor head-to-head results. Florida has a similar resume to Auburn in terms of best wins. Excluding the head-to-head matchup, the thing that puts Florida over Auburn is simply overall record. Florida has taken 2 losses to top 15 teams, while Auburn has 3. Neither Florida or Auburn would be any higher than 7 or 8, so it's pretty easy to put Florida ahead of Auburn. At the 6th spot, I have Penn State. The biggest reason as to why Penn State is at 6 instead of 5 is because the loss they took to Minnesota. And I'll go ahead and say that Minnesota is at number 5. I would have Penn State's resume at the 5 spot, but since Minnesota is next to them in the rankings, I decided to put the Gophers ahead because of that head-to-head matchup. Penn State has 2 solid wins at Iowa and against Michigan. Michigan has actually moved into the top 10 according to the computers, and that helps Penn State stay ahead of teams like Florida and Auburn. And as I've already said, I have Minnesota at number 5. They've only played 2 top 25 teams, and the third best team they've played isn't even in the top 50. But Minnesota has proven that they can beat a good team in Penn State, and I won't punish the loss to Iowa too much. Minnesota has the best win of any team ranked 6 through 12, which I think is something a lot of people don't realize. Yet, yes, this team struggled in the first 3 games of the season against lackluster teams, but ever since, they have dominated poor opponents and beaten a top 5 team in Penn State. If Minnesota pulls off a shocker and beats Ohio State in the Big Ten Championship, Minnesota will walk with ease into the playoffs. And as we start the top 4, I would like to go ahead and mention that the way I select the top 4 is different than the way I rank teams 5 through 12. If a team is undefeated and they have proven that they can beat good teams or stayed in control over a weak schedule, that team deserves to get in. So with the last team to slip in the Week 12 playoffs, I have Georgia. Georgia by far has the best one-loss resume. The Dogs have wins over number 10 Auburn, number 12 Florida, and number 14 Notre Dame. These good wins can help make up for the bad loss to South Carolina. The South Carolina loss is the only thing stopping them from being ranked second behind LSU. Teams behind Georgia might have better losses, but the teams I have behind Georgia don't have better wins than Georgia. And moving on to the 3rd spot, I have Clemson. Besides the North Carolina game in which Clemson won by a point, Clemson has been flawless all year. Take the UNC game out and Clemson has won every game by an average of 38 points. Clemson hasn't beaten any good teams, but with the way they have controlled their opponents, they earn a spot. All Clemson has to do to get in the playoff is avoid a loss or a close call with their 2 remaining opponents. And you could actually argue that Alabama's resume is actually slightly better than Clemson, because Alabama has not had a close call to a bad team, and the best win of both those teams is Texas A&M. And I would agree with this statement, but part of the way you need to rank teams is to make the difference between winning and losing count. And Clemson has simply yet to be disproven this season, and Alabama has lost. It's that simple. Next, at the 2 spot, we have Ohio State. Ohio State only has 1 top 25 win, but is over top 10 Wisconsin, according to the computers, of course, and Ohio State absolutely dominated Wisconsin 38-7. If you win by that much over a top 10 team, then you deserve to get in the top 4. I don't care how bad the rest of the schedule is. And I actually think that if Ohio State beats Penn State in Michigan by 10 or more, I would consider putting them at number 1 over LSU. But for right now, I still have LSU at number 1. They simply have the best resume of any team in the nation. yet to be beaten, and have 3 top 12 wins, including, of course, the win over Alabama. LSU has simply proven more times that they can beat good teams than Ohio State has. If there's ever been a clear number one, it's LSU. LSU, in my mind, is a lock for the playoffs. Unless they get absolutely blown out by Georgia or lose to Texas A&M or lose to Arkansas, then LSU is in. And as an Alabama fan, I don't like to see it, but as a college football fan, it is really exciting to see a newcomer to the playoff like LSU. And I think this season is going to be really exciting with a couple new teams coming in the mix, especially LSU. We could have 2 SEC teams get in. You could have Oregon get in. I think as a college football fan, you got to be really excited for this season. It's just a shame that Alabama, my team, isn't involved in it, or probably won't be involved in it this year, but it's still fun to talk about it. And just as a recap, my top 4 is LSU at number 1, Ohio State at number 2, at number 3 I have Clemson, and at number 4 I have Georgia. I think this is what the committee top 4 is going to be. For the first time since the first committee rankings, I have a very similar top 4 to the committee. I think I'm actually going to have the exact top 4 the committee's going to have, and that hasn't happened at all this season, so that's interesting. I just thought that Georgia had the best resume by far. It's a tough thing to deal with. When they have that loss to South Carolina, and South Carolina is not a good team. They've only beaten 3 FBS teams, and one of them being Georgia. So it's hard to judge how much the South Carolina loss from Georgia, how much that should be punished. But I've decided that they've won enough good games, and if you stack up the wins Georgia has compared to the rest of the top 12, it's better than almost all the other teams except LSU. They have a win over number 10, 12, and a 14, and no other teams have wins that are that good. The only thing is they lost to not even top 40 South Carolina, so it's very hard to judge how that works. Obviously, Georgia wouldn't be any higher than number 4 just because of the South Carolina loss. And yeah, basically I just thought Georgia is the best team to put in there right now. Another one of my controversial picks is number 5 Minnesota. And I feel pretty good about it. And as I said earlier, Minnesota has one of the best wins besides the LSU win over Alabama of any team in the top 12. Penn State is a top 6 team according to my trusted TeamRankings.com rankings. And that's one of the best wins of any team regardless in the country. So I think Minnesota needs to be rewarded for that. And the loss at Iowa, they were competitive. They didn't fold after going down 20-3. They came back and they lost the game, and that's not convenient. But I think I took them out of the top 4, of course, because they did lose a game. But I think they deserve to be still very close to the top 4. And in fact, I actually would have Minnesota at number 6. But I said this earlier, since Minnesota beat Penn State, they deserve to switch with Penn State, because head-to-head matchups matter and they count. And that's why I have Minnesota ahead. And we'll move on to number 8, my other controversial pick. And just to go over it again, Alabama, which is behind Auburn, has yet to play or yet to beat a team better than A&M. And all of Auburn's losses have come to teams that are much better than A&M. And Auburn also has a win over top 10 Oregon. I think Auburn technically has proven that they can beat good teams better than Alabama has. Now, you might be able, and I would totally agree that Alabama's a much better team than Auburn. At least has been a much better team now with Mac Jones and a couple of the defensive players out and Mac Jones playing. Maybe they're not as much better than Auburn, but with with the whole roster, Alabama's a much better team than Auburn. But they just haven't proven anything yet, and it's unfortunate for Alabama that the schedule has fell out that way. Now, obviously, Alabama's going to play Auburn, and it's going to boost the schedule a lot. Alabama will get a top 12, top 15 win depending on how Auburn shakes out for the rest of the season. So we'll see. It's that simple. But I think Auburn deserves to be ahead of Alabama for right now. And it's the same thing with Florida. Florida has only lost to top 10 teams, and they've beaten the top 10 team. So, I think they deserve to be ahead of teams that haven't even proven that they can beat a top 10 team. It's simple. I mean, it's obviously going to be very controversial, but I like my thought process on this. And again, the only other controversial pick I have is Michigan being at number 11. And I think Michigan deserves to be at number 11 because they've proven that they can beat 2 top 20 teams. And they've only lost to top 10 teams. And I think the blowout win over Notre Dame, I think we can treat the blowout win over Notre Dame for Michigan as a 1-point win, and the blowout loss to Wisconsin as a 1-point loss. If you do it like that, Michigan actually has a very impressive resume. They've beaten 2 top 15 teams, and they've only lost to good teams. So that's why I'm keeping Michigan in the mix here. And now, obviously, Michigan is not going to beat Ohio State. So they're going to probably bounce back out after they get beat 38-0 by Ohio State. And now if we move on to some of the teams I've left out, the notable one is Oklahoma and Baylor. The reason I left Oklahoma out of this is because, simply put, Oklahoma has scratched by in every good win they've had. Right? They barely beat Baylor. They barely beat Ohio State. They had a pretty controlling win over Texas, and they lost to Kansas State. They were down 25 to Kansas State as well, and they lost that game. So the Oklahoma's resume is not that impressive. I mean, the best win they have is over Iowa State or Baylor. Both those teams, according to the TeamRankings.com rankings, are ranked 20th. So I just don't think Oklahoma has a better resume than Utah, a team that technically has a better win than Oklahoma's best win and a better loss. That's why Utah would be at 12. And if I had to say, I'd probably put Oklahoma at 13. I haven't really thought about the rest of it, but I would probably put Oklahoma at 13 and maybe Baylor right behind them. The reason Baylor, and they're only a one-loss team, but the reason Baylor's so far down is because they have almost lost every game, almost a bunch of games they've almost lost. I think it's like 4 now, and they did lose another one. So Baylor hasn't been very convincing this year, and they were not able to hold on to the lead to Oklahoma, and they deserve a little punishment for that. And yeah, so that's going to be the end of the video. Let me know in the comments what your top 4 or what your top 12 is. I'd love to see it. Thanks for watching, and let me know if you'd like to see more of these videos.